You are listening to the first series of an 8-part series of Colds and Flus the Wise Woman Way with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome to Time Monk Radio.
Oh, green blessings, Gemini. I'm so glad to be with you again.
Thank you. I'm looking forward. This is perfect timing with cold and flu season upon us, and anxious to hear what you have to say this evening.
Well, when I sat down to lay out some talking points for our month of talking about colds and flus, I realized that I had far more to say than I could cover in 4 shows. And that's partly because colds and flus touch upon some things that are very important, not just in terms of colds and flus, because, of course, they touch upon our immune system and how our immune system works and how herbs can affect the immune system and so on. And as we know, the immune system is important overall, of course, critically important in our health. So we're going to be looking at some of that in some detail. In today's view, we are going to be looking really and asking ourselves very basic questions like, what is a cold? How is a cold different from the flu? What is a virus, and how is a virus different from a bacteria? And how does the immune system respond to a virus? How does it respond to a bacteria? Is it the same or is it different? And toward the end of the show, we're going to ask ourselves what actually causes the symptoms that we call the flu. All right, are these symptoms the flu or something else the flu? And are the symptoms actually caused by our own immune system, which is, in fact, what happens? And we're going to start to open the door into looking at herbs that we can use to nourish the immune system so that we stay healthier overall and have a greater resistance to colds and the flu. Now, let me say right out that I'm not suggesting that a healthy person never gets sick. This is an idea that seems to be very prevalent both in the scientific tradition of healing, where we measure and fix, but what we want to do is to prevent the flu by giving an inoculation to it, and we want to prevent colds. Not that we necessarily want to be healthier, but that we want to prevent being sick. And also in the heroic tradition, we have this idea that somehow if we are the person we ought to be, if we're meditating the right way and exercising the right way and eating the right way and doing all the right things, then we're not going to get sick. In fact, that's not what my experience has shown me. I was rather interested to begin to notice that people who are suddenly diagnosed with a life-threatening, usually terminal illness, or who suddenly drop dead, are often people who haven't gotten sick, about whom could be said, gee, I don't even remember the last time so-and-so was sick. As we start to look into the immune system and how it functions, we're going to start to see that actually getting the occasional cold or the flu is a pretty good idea so far as the immune system is concerned. Once we've opened the door into the herbs that can help the immune system, we are next week going to look at the difference between cold colds and hot colds. And if you're too intrigued, wait until next week. You can go to YouTube, and I have a little YouTube video about cold colds and hot colds. We're going to be talking about it next week and talking about herbs that affect both hot colds and cold colds. And we're going to ask ourselves, is vitamin C, either natural vitamin C from fruits and vegetables or ascorbic acid taken in pills and powders, is that useful or effective against against colds and flus, either preventing them or actually treating them once we have them. And then 2 weeks from now, we are going to have an exciting show that I call Better Than a Flu Shot. And it has 3 of my favorite ways to both prevent and deal with colds and flu: sauerkraut, elderberry, and astragalus. And the last show of the month, we're going to look at some specific antivirals. We'll know by then why we might want to use antivirals. And we're going to look at the action of eleuthero, which is also known as Siberian ginseng, at St. John's wort, which is also known as St. John's wort, and at bone set, which is, some people think the same as comfrey, but in fact, it's quite a different plant. And you can see we have to just go on. So, show 5 is going to approach the topic of hand washing and hand sanitizing. Very important topic, and perhaps not exactly as you think. And we're going to look at some antibacterial herbs, including echinacea, garlic, and hero. Show 6, I call What the Bees Know. And we're going to look at the effects of propolis, honey, and various preparations that can be made from evergreen trees on colds and the flu. Show 7, I could hardly believe that we had done so many shows and we still hadn't talked about coughs and chest congestion, because that's, of course, one of the things that makes us quite miserable when we have colds and the flu. So we're going to look at mullein, coltsfoot, wild cherry bark, osha, and sage, and probably a few other things as well. And then our last show for this topic here at Time Monk Radio is going to be herbs that I avoid whenever I have a cold. And that includes cayenne, golden seal, and essential oils. We have got a lot to talk about in the next couple of months, and I'm interested to see also where it will lead us on from there. So let's get started.
All right. Wonderful. I'm looking forward to all these segments, and I just saw some uh-ohs that I did, but we'll get to that when you get to it.
Okay.
All right, Susan. Thank you.
Yeah. It's not really uh-oh. It's just, what really serves us best when we're dealing with these such common problems, and yet I find, for all their commonness, misunderstood. So, what is a cold? A cold is the result of an infection by a rhinovirus. These are the cold viruses. Rhino, of course, means nose. They're nose viruses. And they get up your nose and they get in your eyes. And I like to talk about a cold center that was set up in England, in the United Kingdom. And as only, to my mind, the English could, they tried out all of the things your mother told you. They took people and they doused them with cold water and sent them outside to see if they'd get a cold. They made them go out in wet underwear, in no underwear. Whatever your mother told you, don't do it, you'll get a cold. They actually experimented with groups of people to see if they did this thing, would they get a cold? And the answer was no. None of those things, in fact, caused them to get colds. But if they played cards with someone who had a cold, they would get a cold. It's that hand to nose and eye connection.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yes, because a cold is a virus. And most viruses need to move from body to body pretty quickly. Kind of like the way I had to go shopping when I lived the winter in the Rocky Mountains of Canada. I would go in one store, do what I had to do, and make sure that my next errand was in the store next door, and just brazen it through as I went through there. So viruses generally need warm transmission. Flu is also a virus. So, in fact, when we talk about colds and flus, we are talking about the same kind of thing. So neither colds nor flus are bacterial infections. And because of that, it means that things that we do that might counter a bacterial infection may or may not be very effective when we have a cold or a flu. And that's because viruses are quite different from bacteria. Bacteria actually are cells themselves and have life and community and organization. But a virus is just part of a cell. It actually requires the cell of the host organism in order to replicate. So we can be ganged up on by bacteria, and bacteria are very good at forming communities that gang up on us. But viruses have to infiltrate us. They have to become, as it were, the Trojan horse that the cell lets in, because cells don't let just anything in. Viruses have to figure out how to get into the cells and then how to hijack the machinery of the cell. The way that the cell operates, feeds itself, replicates, the virus has to take this stuff and use it for itself so that it can replicate. It can't do it on its own. And so viruses also tend to be more loners than bacteria. They generally don't need to work in groups. They need to be single and stealthy. So the immune system treats viruses and bacteria in a very different way. As a matter of fact, there are two branches or parts of the immune system, one part of which deals with bacterial infections and the other part of which deals with viral infections. What was explained to me by my teachers was that the immune system is like a seesaw or a teeter-totter. And the part that responds to bacteria, if that is activated, then the part that's responding to viruses is depressed. So that you literally can't boost the immune system. You can only boost half of it at a time. You can, however, nourish, strengthen, tonify, and help the immune system to adapt. And these are things that herbs do very well indeed. So if we had a viral infection, the part of the immune system that is going to counter that virus is complex. And it, as it were, takes all the energy, all the goods, all the food, and the part then that counters bacterial infections isn't working as strongly. And that's why it's so frequent that when we have a cold or the flu, that it can go into an itis, into a bacterial infection. And this is where strengthening, ourselves and nourishing ourselves can really come into play. As I said before, the healthy person may get a cold or the flu, but they are generally done with it in a very short amount of time. For a cold, 3 to 5 days. For the flu, 7 to 10 days. And it doesn't devolve into a lingering infection somewhere, especially in the respiratory system or in other parts of the body. So we want to think about all the time how we can not stimulate and not necessarily improve the functioning of the immune system, as we'll see, but to help the immune system have all of the resources it needs at its disposal. When a viral particle enters our body, it encounters specialized cells made by the immune system, which are in our blood to see if there are any viral particles. If those viral particles are seen, the messenger cell goes back to immune central and says there is indeed a virus here, and other cells are then sent out to the location. I think about the honeybees, and how a honeybee will go out and scout the honey and come back and do the wiggle dance in the hive, and all the other bees get together and go out and collect the nectar. Well, not quite yet, because first other specialized cells go and they measure the viral particle, they sniff the viral particle, they lick the viral particle, they really get what this viral particle is, and they go back again to immune central and they say, looks like this, smells like this, feels like this, tastes like this is the thing it is, and they look through the whole library that they have. And if they have encountered this virus before, then they simply take that recipe out of the library and start making what they need to make to deal with this particular virus. There are hundreds of rhinoviruses. When we are young, we have not encountered them. And so it seems like children have a nonstop cold. They don't really. They have cold after cold after cold as they come into contact with the primary rhinoviruses in their environment, so their immune system can begin to build up its library of known viruses. Just so, immunizations and inoculations introduce into the body viruses, viral particles, often in a dead state, sometimes in an attenuated, not quite alive state, although occasionally alive, so that our immune system can learn how to make antibodies, the antibodies that will counter this virus. So look at all the specialized cells that are needed by the immune system, the smells in the blood, the cells in the blood that find the viral particle and identify it, the ones that go back and measure it, and then the ones that become the antibodies who go to do what they can against it, remembering that the virus, unlike a bacteria, is not a separate agency that we can do something about, but is literally walled up in our own cells. And so to get to it, we have to injure ourselves. When we have a virus, our immune system makes antibodies, and those antibodies have to injure some of our cells to get to the viruses in order to kill them. So, remember at the beginning of the show when I intimated that what we think of as the symptoms of the flu aren't really the symptoms of the flu, but the symptoms of our own immune system actually attacking the flu. Strangely enough, and when I first read this, I had to go back and read it again because I could hardly believe that it was true. But in the flu epidemic, in the early 20th century, the people most likely to die were those who had the strongest immune systems, because the symptoms of the flu are the immune system's response to the flu. When there's a flu virus in our bodies, the immune system says, turn up the heat. This is the same thing for a rhinovirus, for a cold. Turn up the heat. Those viruses can't replicate at temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So the immune system says, rev it up, pour on the heat, and we get a fever. It's one of the ways that we know we're getting sick with the cold or a flu, that the immune system is turning up the heat. And how high your fever is and how hot that fever is doesn't have anything to do with a hot cold and cold, as we will talk about next week. The immune system, furthermore, sends out other messengers throughout the body to warn them about the virus, and these messengers make your muscles ache. The flu in years past was known as break bone fever because it can make you feel like all your bones have been broken. Your muscles ache so much from it. Bone set, which we're going to be talking about in show 4, is called that because it has the ability to counter that achiness in the muscles. So once again, we come back to a theme of this show and this whole 2 months that we're going to spend on colds and flus, and that is that we do not wish to stimulate the immune system, because we can only stimulate half of it and depress the other half of it. Instead, we want to, from the wise woman perspective, look at what we can do to tonify, nourish, and support the immune system, to help the immune system to be more flexible, more adaptive, and better able to deal with things in a moderate way. Again, this is why we use immunizations and vaccinations. They teach the immune system how to deal with viruses in this, shall we say, more meditative way. It's as though the untried immune system, like myself sometimes, sees something that might be a threat and gets totally hysterical about it. I've seen myself overreact to things that later on I thought, well, gosh, it really wasn't that big a deal. Meditation certainly helps, but what it usually is that helps the most of us is just a little foreknowledge, a little, understanding what's happening, and that's how the immune system prefers to work about viruses. It likes to get its library together so it knows what's happening. At a class that I was teaching about colds and flus, and we were talking about viruses and the immune system, someone asked a really excellent question. They said, well, you're talking about these special cells go out and they say, this is what the viral particle looks like, and then comes back and they look through the library and see if they can make something, and if they don't, they have to figure it out. How long does that take? If it's not in the library, how long does it take the immune system to figure out how to make the antibody to kill the virus. The questioner said, yeah, I mean, the immune system will figure it out, right, eventually. And I said, well, I think that you're right. I really don't know for sure, but I think that you're right that the immune system will eventually figure it out. But I don't really know how long it would take. I would guess that we're talking more like weeks than minutes. Well, the goddess always provides. There was a virologist in the group who raised her hand and said, not even that short a time. It is more like months, and often the virus will have killed you before your immune system figures out how to counter it. So, what herbs are there to nourish the immune system? We're going to be talking about them in the coming weeks as we continue to delve into the mysteries of colds and flus, as we come to see them not so much as things to be feared or necessarily to be warded against, but things that can actually help our immune system to function better if we occasionally get a cold or a flu. I have lots more information for you about lots of other topics at my website, and I hope you do stop by sometime and visit me at susanweed.com. My books are wonderful resources for all of the things that I'm talking about, and especially as we get into this and we start talking about tinctures and infusions and vinegars. If you're not familiar with those, or how to buy them or how to make them, you might want to go to the wisewomanbookshop.com and check out my books there. And they will help you to make all of those remedies and tell you actually lots more about many of the herbs that we're going to be talking about. So one of the first herbs that I can offer you as a suggestion for nourishing your immune system, and one that you can use this week while we're waiting to get further into it, is garlic. The evidence is in. There are thousands of scientific studies now showing that garlic is actually an antiviral, that it helps to prime the immune system, to support the immune system in dealing with viruses. We are also finding out that garlic in the diet helps the immune system to deal with cancer cells as well. So we don't have to get really esoteric. Between now and the next time we meet, I hope you eat a lot of garlic. This is Susan Weed wishing you green blessings until we meet again.
Thank you, Susan. This concludes part 1 of our 8-part series, Colds and Flus, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.